welcome to service this Sunday. We ask that you guys please stand and worship with us. I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise, treasures this fade, are never enough. You came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. Oh, I'm not afraid. Show you my weakness, my failures and faults. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing is better than you. Oh, you turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing is better than you. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You turn seas into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Sometimes on this journey, get lost in my mistakes. It looks like me the weakness is a canvas for your strength. My story isn't over, my story just begun. Failure won't define me, that's what my Father does. Failure won't define me, that's what my Father does. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door. It ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. Hey. Arrival's not the end game, the journey's where you are. You never wanted perfect, you just wanted my heart. And the story isn't over, the story isn't good. Failure's never final when the Father's in the room. Failure's never final when the Father's in the room. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. Prodigals come home, helpless find hope. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Prison doors swing wide, the death comes to life. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Miracles take place, the cynical find faith. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Jericho's walls quake, strongholds now shaking. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. Yeah.
single lie that tells me I will never measure up. Am I more than just the sum of every high and every low? Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know. Ooh, you see I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You see I am strong when I think I am weak. You see I am held when I am falling short, and when I don't belong. Oh, you see that I am yours, and I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe the only thing that matters now is everything you think of me. Oh, in you I find my worth, in you I find my identity. Sing it up if you know it. Ooh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. You say I am held when I am falling short, and when I don't belong. Oh, you say I am yours, and I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe. Taking all I have and now I'm laying it at your feet. Yeah. You'll have every failure, God, you'll have every victory. Ooh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. You say I am held when I am falling short, and when I don't belong. Oh, you say that I am yours, and I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. Yeah, I believe, oh, I believe, yes, I believe what you say of me. I believe.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter Church. We're so glad that you are here. Yeah, you can clap for that. That's awesome. That's right. Doesn't matter what anybody else says about you. The God who created the universe says that you matter and that you are loved. And so that's what that song speaks to us. We're so glad you're here with us today on this last day of July. Today is the day. We're having a nice social gathering after church. For those of you who want it to be nice, if you're a competitive person, bring it on. That's all I got to say is bring it on. We're going to meet at Barnes Memorial Park in Dedham, and all you need to do is just grab a lunch, bring your lunch. We're going to eat together. We're going to hang out, get to know each other, and we're also going to play some kickball. We're going to have a good time. We hope you can join us. So right after the church, grab your food or whatever, and you can head on over there. Something else we have going on right now is a challenge, and we are looking to help people who are ready to take that next step to serve here at Encounter Church. And so we're asking you, would you be willing to give up one Sunday a month to serve in an area to help our church, to serve God, to take your next step of faith? And so what you can do is you can sign up here at encounterchurch.com/challenge. And we'll connect with you, and you can just start off with 1 week a month, if that works. We've already had several people that have signed up. We thank you for that, and we look forward to reaching out to you and getting you involved and plugged in where you would best fit and be able to serve. Today, Chris is going to finish up our series. It's been an awesome series. Haven't you enjoyed the last month? It's been so good, so good. He calls it nerdy, but I love it. I love it. He's so brilliant. And he's just able to explain things so clearly. You can go ahead and have a seat, and then Chris will come up and finish up our series, Good Questions, in just a moment.
Some nagging questions are easier to answer than others. Those, did I pay the cable bill? What's the new guy's name again? Let me Google that for you questions. Others are not so easy. You know the ones. I'm talking about those itch at the back of your skull. Is there really only one way to heaven? Where do we go when we die? Science doesn't have an answer type of questions. These questions are too big to leave unanswered, my friend. That's why I'm glad you're here. You want the answers. You're willing to open up a can of worms to find the truth. You have a good question. Let's talk about it.
Good morning. Welcome to Encounter Church. I want to apologize at first, just with my voice. They were joking that I had a head cold this week, and they're like, "You sound like Barry White." And I was like, "Can't get enough of your love, babe." I'm like, "No, can't go down that low." So I'm like Barry White in puberty, maybe, is my voice today. So, which is just, hopefully it won't get in the way, because I am so excited about this message today as I get to wrap up this series called Good Question. If you're new today, just to kind of give you a little bit of an overview where we've been, is over the course of this month, I just wanted to kind of tackle some questions that sometimes you get asked, sometimes that maybe you're asking around Christianity and science. And so we looked at kind of the origin of the universe. Last week, we looked at dinosaurs. This week, we're looking at kind of the hairiest of all of the things that sometimes you get asked around science. And part of it is because what I said earlier in this series is that as a church, we're committed not just to helping you grow in your faith, but helping the next generation grow in theirs. And this issue around science is oftentimes a tension point that I come across when I'm talking to people who are processing faith. My undergrad, just for you to know why is this a passion point of mine, I became a Christian in college while essentially studying biochemistry. I'm still to this day very much a nerd. I was joking with our team. I read theoretical physics at night. That's what I do every single night. My wife has learned not to ask me the question, "What are you reading about tonight?" I'm just like, "Well, I'm looking into the mathematics of the standard model equation because I'm really fascinated." She's like, "Okay, never mind." That's not something I really want to talk about with you right now. And so I love science and I love Jesus. And those don't have to be mutually exclusive. One gives me an appreciation for the blueprints. The other one gives me an appreciation for the architect. And that's kind of our desire, is that as a church, we would be biblically grounded, but we would also be people who can think thoughtfully and aren't afraid of arguments against our faith. I want that for my daughter. I want that for my son. I want that for your children. And I want it for you. So that was the heartbeat of why we did this series in the first place, because somebody's like, "Why are you teaching a message on dinosaurs?" It's because, well, dinosaurs matter. And not just to a 5-year-old, but to the 45-year-old who's asking questions about faith, or is asking you questions about faith. So with that said, I want to introduce you to something that is incredibly fascinating called combat juggling. Combat juggling is exactly what it sounds like. You are juggling while you're simultaneously fighting. And the goal, the way that you win combat juggling, is while you have your 3 pins way up in the air, you have to slap a pin out of someone else's hand. And so combat juggling gets really intense. You've got people swatting and pushing and shoving. The only thing you can basically not do in combat juggling is punch somebody in the face. But give it time, eventually that'll probably be added, all right? But combat juggling is a part of something called the World Sports. It's an event that happens globally next year. It follows the Olympics. And so this is something that potentially next year, flipping through ESPN, you're going to find this alongside of another world sport event called toe wrestling, which is also equally valid. I just want you to know, like, if you think you've hit your limit in life and that there's not a place you can go, I'm telling you, there are future options for you, okay? Toe wrestling, combat juggling, knife fights where you just go in and slice things, run through an obstacle course with a knife, because that sounds really safe, right? Those are options for you, okay? But the reason I bring up combat juggling is because in some ways, that's essentially what we're going to do today. I'm going to present two different arguments, and there's going to be a little bit of a combat to them. And the reason why is because both of these arguments cannot win simultaneously. Either one is right and one is wrong. And that's it, period. It's zero sum. There is no both winners. This is not a cooperative game. It's combat juggling. And what I want to do, and the reason I use combat juggling as a metaphor to start it, is because in some ways, part of the arguments that you're going to hear that make it sound so compelling is that they're constantly flying up in the air and they're constantly moving. And what I want to do is slow down the arguments for evolution this morning. I want to slow them down enough so that you and I can actually be thoughtful about them. Because if you remember, there is the story you tell about the world. And that story shapes how you see everything. In fact, your facts and experiences, what you experience is interpreted through the story you tell about the world. One of my favorite games, drives my wife insane, is I will watch a news story and then I'll go back between Fox News and MSNBC. And I go back and forth because it's the same thing being told in two different ways. And you just bounce back and forth and be like, these people are so committed to the story they're telling about the world, but they claim to be committed to the facts and experiences. But what's actually happening is facts and experiences are being interpreted through the story you tell about the world. And I'm not trying to get political. I'm just trying to be an observer. Do it. It'll make you angry, but it's also true. It's the same thing, but both worlds completely form a different narrative about what happened. And this is not just true of the news. This is something that you and I do too. And that if we're going to be really thoughtful around good questions, then we have to get to the layer that lives underneath the surface, our beliefs and our assumptions about the world. Remember, to understand the answers, to really fight a good question to get the answers, we have to question our assumptions. And today is a day where I want to question a lot of assumptions, because what I want to argue very clearly is that evolution presents a solid case as if it is a ipso facto, done, no dispute, factual-based theory that there is no questions left. And I think by the end, you'll realize that it is perhaps one of the world's biggest faith systems that exist. So, to do that, let's jump into the good question around evolution. And to convey the two predominant views, because there are only two views of creation, or how the origin of life happened, you have in Genesis 1:20, God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing which the water teems, and he moves about according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. That in Genesis 1, at the very beginning, we see God as the creator. That out of nothing, he creates something. And not only creates something, he creates someones. He creates the animals and the plants. He creates the sea creatures and the birds, and he creates you and me in the form and kind of predecessor of Adam and Eve. And that's one view of how life got on planet Earth. The other one comes from J.D. Sutherland, I like the way that he lets his assumptions come up. He says, at some stage in the origin of life, an informational polymer must have arisen by purely chemical means. So this is what's called a prebiotic researcher. He researches how the origin of life happened. He's a researcher out of England. And notice his words. This polymer, speaking of RNA, must have arisen by purely chemical means. He's absolutely committed to that. There's no other box for him to explain how life originated on planet Earth, period. So you've got two different worldviews, creation and evolution. Those two different worldviews have profound implications that we'll touch on in a little bit. But these are the only two explanations for how you and I got here, ultimately. And what I want to do is actually unpack the word evolution, because the challenge with evolution is it's a complicated word. So I want to introduce you to an even more nuanced view. You've got macroevolution. Macroevolution is the goo to you argument. That's that at some point in the past, a bunch of stuff came together, bubbled up, and formed a cell that eventually that goo became you. That's macroevolution, big picture. We came from chimpanzees, that kind of argument. Then you've got microevolution. And microevolution is variation within a species. That's the reason you have Chihuahuas and Rottweilers and Doberman Pinschers, right? And Golden Retrievers. That's microevolution. It's a variation within the same species of a dog. The reason these two matter is because I think what happened with Darwin is he made a fundamental error in his thinking. Because Darwin said this, all right? So just to be really good, if I'm going to discuss evolution, I want to go back to the originator of the theory of it. So on page 158 of his published book in 1859, this is what Darwin says. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive, keyword, slight modifications, then my theory would absolutely break down. I think what happened, and this is so important, is Darwin arrives, he does his research on his little island, he notices the kind of the variation within the species on the island, and he makes a logical jump that says microevolution is evidence for macroevolution. Variations of species, Chihuahuas and Rottweilers. If that can happen, then surely goo to you can happen. But he's being intellectually honest when he says, however, if we cannot demonstrate that numerous successful and slight, big key word, slight modifications, then my theory breaks down. So he's smart enough to realize there's a point in which this idea I have may not be right. And here's how I would say it. Peter Thiel wrote a book on entrepreneurship, and his title was actually profoundly insightful. It was called 0 to 1. And his idea was that 0 to 1 is harder to get to than 1 to 2. To go from absolutely nothing to a something is a bigger jump than to have a something and add a something to it. Does that make sense? And so 0 to 1 is the macro. 1 to 2 is the micro. And what happens, philosophically, mathematically, scientifically, Darwin makes the mistake, I believe, that these are the exact same thing. And what I want to do today is show you how they're absolutely, fundamentally different. And it was a flawed way of thinking. 0 to 1 is impossible. 1 to 2 happens all the time. And the argument that you're going to hear behind evolutionary kind of scientists, their linchpin in their whole entire argument is time. There was enough time this could have happened. When you got billions of years, something can happen. But my argument is that no amount of time makes the impossible possible. So if you have 5 years to make the impossible happen, then you've got 5 years wasted. If you've got 5 billion years to make the impossible happen, you've got 5 billion years wasted. No amount of time makes the impossible possible. And the impossible is the 0 to 1, as we're about to demonstrate. So I want to walk you through some of the major experiments that are the fundamental basis. You were taught this in school, whether or not you realize it. Your kids are taught this in school, whether you realize it or not. The first one is the Urey-Miller experiment or the Miller-Urey experiment. was done in the 1950s, and the argument is essentially they recreated what they thought was the atmosphere at the time, the gases that were in the air. They had water in a container, and they sent these things through an apparatus that went through an electrode that simulated lightning. And then the lightning strikes, and then they let the compounds that were essentially created out of that lightning strike fall to another flask and sit there for days. And what was revolutionary about this experiment at the time is when they went to it, they noticed the liquid had turned brown, and inside of it was almost 24 amino acids. And the headline was, "Scientists discover how building blocks of life could have been formed." That was the argument. And this experiment gets held up today as one of the defining, clearest examples of how a kind of rough and forming earth could have provided the building blocks of life. Now, a couple problems with this. What we now know is that the atmosphere that Miller-Urey produced in their flask was actually not the atmosphere that scientists currently think now was the atmosphere. And the reason that matters is because the compounds, the gases in that atmosphere are radically different now in theory, and those gases are far more antagonistic towards amino acids. Okay? Without getting super chemical and technical and the difference between redox reactions and things like that, just trust me that there was far more oxygen in the atmosphere is what the current theory is than what they thought. And oxygen, though it's needed for life, is actually really, really a big hindrance for the chemical reactions they were trying to create. The other thing is something I actually noticed when I read this experiment, because, again, I was trained as a scientist. And there was this random comment inside of their study, and I'm like, why did it take 40 years for someone to figure this thing out? They talked about borosilicate deposits at the bottom. And I know for all of you, you just got really excited because when you hear borosilicate, man, it just, whoo, it's like hearing Celtics won, right? But let me explain it really quickly because this matters. In this experiment, they used flasks that were made out of borosilicate, boron and silicon. And it did not hit them when they did this experiment that perhaps the boron and the silicate inside the glass could actually be broken out of the glass because of the chemical reaction and form a compound substrate that makes the reactions happen even more. And so what was done 40 years later, when someone actually thought, maybe the type of glassware they used might have made a difference. The type of glassware made a huge difference in the experiment. There was not nearly as many amino acids created. There wasn't many, the building blocks that had magically appeared in the original experiment disappeared in the second one. Because the boron and the silicon inside the glass had actually broken off and formed a chemical part of the reaction that produced the amino acids. This was crazy. And they didn't catch it at the time. And here I am 40 years later reading this experiment, this paper, and I'm like, where did they not, and I want to look around and be like, did you not with boron silicon? And they're like, weirdo, like, quit looking at me and talking about boron silicon. Because I was like, this is crazy. And so not only is the gas that they presupposed was part of the atmosphere not actually the fact, also they use glassware that completely contaminated the whole experiment. And yet you will not hear about either one of those things when you're taught this in elementary or middle school. Your kids will not learn those facts. They will simply be taught the Miller-Urey experiment was one of the defining moments in prebiotic research because it showed that building blocks can be formed. But anyone who knows anything about organic chemistry or biochem knows that amino acids by themselves are not the building blocks of life. Okay? And to further complicate it, this guy comes along, the one I already quoted, and his lab breaks through in editorial headlines in 2009 that he actually creates even closer building blocks because amino acids are not really building blocks, but they're important. What you really need to have an organism is something like DNA and RNA. Those are really essential for life because you need them to be able to self-replicate. So his lab releases this headline in 2009 that they had recreated through a synthetic chemical pathway RNA. But in reality, when you actually dig into it, when you read the study, not the editorial headline, what you find is they did not make RNA. They made a compound similar to RNA. But anyone who knows hand grenades and horseshoes knows that those are the only two games where close matters. Chemistry, that's not the case. If you work in any type of like pharmacy industry or a biochem lab, you know that close is not the same thing. It has to be the exact thing. Biology doesn't play hand grenades. It doesn't play horseshoes. And close is not enough. And they created a synthetic, similar compound to RNA, but it is not the RNA that exists inside of you and me. And so again, but why was this thing heralded? Because I would argue that his statement, they must have a purely chemical means. They are just as committed to how life got here in their frame as we are in ours. And I think if you're going to have a conversation around it, both sides have to be open about their assumptions. And to say, hey, your two of your most fundamental taught experiments did not produce anything close to the building blocks of life. And in reality, think about it. We are the most scientifically advanced people on planet Earth to have ever existed. And not yet once have we produced life in the lab. We know that it takes about 200 to 300 proteins for a self-replicating organism to actually chemically react. And yet, there is no lab on planet Earth that's been able to replicate life. In the most hospitable, intellectually advanced civilization ever, the thing that's supposed to have been so simple that random chance and time could have produced it, we have yet been able to reproduce it. Maybe because 0 to 1 is far more impossible than they want to acknowledge. Again, I told you, I'm coming in. This is combat juggling. Okay? I'm going to push hard. I don't have a chance to push hard through everything because we would be here all day and you would definitely leave. Okay? So I'm hitting highlights here. And I want to be very honest to those who are like super thoughtful, whether you're online or in the room. And you're like, but what about? Look, I will buy you coffee and we can what about all day. All right? I love this stuff. I don't have a lot of people who want to what about with me around some of these things. But I will what about till you get tired of what abouting. All right? And we can what about anything. All right? Because I like this stuff. This is fun to me. All right? And there's just not a big plate. I just don't have a lot of friends who think this is fun. It's surprising, right? So if you want to go deeper, chris@encounterchurch.com is my email address. I will set up a calendar. And I'll block 4 hours for you, unless you need 6 to 8. Okay? Because we can what about it. But let me jump on, because it matters. One of the things that's very fascinating, this is just really brief, but one of the things that's required for the building blocks of life is something we all know, because we're told to drink it all the time: water. Now, this is a question most of you have probably never thought about before, but how did a planet filled with 70% of water, known as the blue planet, get so much water? We just take for granted water's always been here. But yet, if you dig into scientific research, what you'll find is that there is not a clear, compelling argument for how water got here. If you take the argument that Earth was formed and as it was volcanically reacting and coalescing together as this ball of hot, bubbly mess, that there was about 50% of the Earth's water contained as water vapor inside of all sides of those volcanic explosions. That's about the most confident they can be. It's about 50% of the water that the Earth currently has was in volcanoes. So the argument for where the other 50% comes in, and actually this is an argument that gets thrown out a lot, they love this argument, is that it came from comets. So the other argument for where the rest of the 50% of water came from is that we were inundated by so many comets that were frozen and asteroids that were with frozen water on them, that's where the rest of the water came from on planet Earth, was outside of the Earth. In fact, even in the prebiotic realm, they will argue that comets brought some of the compounds we needed for a prebiotic. But think about it. How many comets had to hit this planet to seed life, to bring the water? And what you find is actually there's a huge debate within people who study this very narrow field, where some are like, there's no way. The sheer volume of asteroids and meteorites that would have had to hit us that were small enough to not destroy the planet, but were significant enough to have enough water to fill the planet is almost absurd. Because if you have a really large one with a lot of frozen water and it hits the planet, guess what? There's no more planet. But if you have a bunch of tiny ones, that water gets evaporated as it's flying through planet Earth at 17,000 miles per hour and slams into the ground. And so water is a big debate. Where did the water come from? They don't know. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. Not really, because this would be a horrible thing to have as a friend. It's a microplasm. It's microplasm genitalium. That gives you enough information. All right? Not something you ever want to hear your doctor say. The reason I bring it up is it is the simplest living organism on planet Earth today. It is the one that scientists know is the absolute simple in the count of proteins. It has about 500 genes. It produces about 500 proteins for life. And on top of that, it's a parasitic organism. I bring this up because what did Darwin say? He said that you had to show how life could be formed through simple, very small increments. And so where I think the fallacy is that you've got these experiments that supposedly show, we created a few amino acids. Well, you need a bunch of amino acids and a lot of amino acids to form one protein. But you need about 500 of them inside of a cellular wall with all the other mechanisms in place, self-replicating, in order to produce the simplest living organism on planet life. If 0 to 1 is hard, 0 to 500 is really hard. So we start looking, and you start getting more and more granular around this. Not the wave the flag, evolution is right, you're wrong, you're stupid, you believe in a God who created everything. Evolution is fact, it's science, you can't even question it. But when you start to ask questions about the assumptions, what you find is it's built on a house of cards. And I'm not trying to be anti-science. I told you how committed I am to the discipline and the study of science. But the problem with science is it's a tool and a discipline to answer the question of how, not the question of why. And it's so committed to trying to answer the why question that it goes outside the bounds of what its discipline and tools can actually do. And so they cannot explain the jump from 0 to 1. And they cannot explain a jump from 0 to 500. And remember, this is a parasitic organism. So this organism does not even have the ability to make everything it needs. It has to rely on a host, which I would argue is a bit of a problem for this single-cell organism, because what does that require for life? A host. So the simplest organism we have on planet Earth that's filled with 500 proteins requires another organism like you and me filled with countless more complexities. And this thing only lives in the lungs or the reproductive system. So two specific type of cells. And the simplest organism on planet Earth requires you and me to even have life. It does not matter how much time you have. The impossible is not possible. Numbers, successes, slight modifications. 0 to 500 is not a slight modification. It's a huge jump. And even if you were to go lowball, it is still 300 proteins is the estimated, based on some research that's been done, is the estimated absolute floor for a self-replicating organism. Now I want to talk to you about some friends of ours, okay? Because I'm jumping through arguments here, because I want to be comprehensive. I just can't be super, I want to be sweeping. I just can't be as deep. So this is a Neanderthal, This is a Homo sapien. One of the things that you'll hear is that, well, clearly there is a tree of life, and we evolved from that tree. And look, I recognize, again, what about the what about? We can what about it. There are a lot, well, depending on who you ask, because they're constantly rotating, but there are other species on this tree of life that produces us. And I can talk to you in depth about them. If you want to talk about Lucy, we can talk about Lucy. Okay, for those who are big Lucy fans, all right? If you don't know who Lucy is, don't even worry about it. All right? But this is a Neanderthal, and a Neanderthal is supposedly one of our predecessors, genetically speaking. Now, what's fascinating is if you walked up to this dude, you would just think he's an epically long-bearded, long-haired hippie man living on the beaches of California, right? I mean, like, you're not looking at this dude and being like, clearly a Neanderthal. And I would argue if you looked at humanity, the beauty of humanity is our diversity. Take a picture of people all around the world. We look different. And that's actually a good thing. It's a reflection of the glory and the majesty of a God who cannot be contained in a single form of any specific type of tribe or nationality. He is bigger than that. Right? And so here's a God whose diversity and glory has to be captured through an array of just this full like symphony of humanity from all around the world. And Neanderthals, I would argue, are not a separate species of humans. A couple different reasons why, and I think one compelling. And again, this is not me being some bald-headed dude who does armchair science coming up here and just being like, oh, I read the internet, and the internet does not lie, because we all know the internet does lie, right? So this is not me coming up here saying I read a couple pages because I Googled. All right? That's not me being faithful to you as your pastor. All right? I spend countless time researching, diving in, reading studies, and actually being knowledgeable. I'm not going to talk about something I'm not knowledgeable about. And this argument that I'm about to give to you is also an argument currently happening inside. I love going into these worlds and finding where the arguments are. Because oftentimes science produces this homogeneous, we're all on the same page, we all agree, there's no questioning it. But in reality, when you go beneath the surface, you realize there are huge groups of people within these specific fields having heated debates about the things that we're told at this level is not even questionable. And so one of the debates currently inside of this world is that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens are actually the same species. And the reason why is when the hominids, the group that we call the homos, that were introduced as a classification in the 1800s. So Homo sapiens, Homo neanderthalis, all of those. When that term was derived, it was never defined. It was just the word for humans. And so they didn't put boundaries and parameters on it. They didn't say, well, this is what, if you're a part of the hominids, this is what you are, and if you're not, then this is what you are. They didn't separate it. Because the assumption was, well, there's just one, the Homo sapiens. And that lack of definition created problems. Because bones would be found, and they would have debates. Well, is this a Homo sapien, or is this a different type of hominid? And Homo neanderthalis was considered to be a separate one. Now, one of the things that most of you probably were taught at some point in science is that species, one of the defining traits within species is their ability to breed with themselves. That's why you can have a chickapoo, right? That's why you can have all these crazy dog combinations, because they're all in the same species and they can breed. And I don't know if you know this, but many of you have about 2% Neanderthal DNA currently in your body right now. And I just point out this simple fact, right? Now, if you came from Asian origin, there's a chance you don't have this, but most of us have Neanderthal DNA. Some African populations don't as well. There's other groups called denizens that are present inside of Asian populations that have been discovered genetically as they've done research. Denizens were also considered, Homo denizens were also considered a separate species, but yet, in fact, Within Asian populations, you have a similar percentage of denizen genetics. And my point is, very simply, to say what gets portrayed as a very clear family tree. And this species begat this species, and this is where we came from. Our predecessor was not a different species. And if it was, we would not have been able to breed with them. And we would not have their DNA inside of us. All they've done is they've created a dividing line where I would argue scientifically there's not. And one of the defining traits of being a human that is eventually kind of not completely coalesced around, there's some debate around it, is cultural. Right? Monkeys don't bury their dead. They don't produce artwork. Chimpanzees, gorillas don't do that. Neanderthals did. They created art. They buried their dead. They had rituals. They were humans. They were just part of the big sweeping symphony that we call Homo sapiens. But they were pegged as Homo neanderthalis and portrayed to you and me as evidence of evolution. Does that make sense? When in fact, I don't think the argument is quite as strong as it's portrayed. And we can do this all day with the what about, with the different parts of the tree, but this matters. And just to wrap it up, because I'm in the realm of genetics, okay? Believe it or not, it's really hard to find a church-appropriate picture of Adam and Eve. That's what I learned. They were really committed to accuracy in ancient paintings. So you have to forgive my stained glass window, but this is Adam and Eve. And one of the most exciting scientific things that have happened in the last 50 years is genetics. Right? It's been incredible what it's uncovered. It uncovered the Neanderthal argument, the denizen argument. But one of the arguments it also encoded and revealed to us is that, and this is scientific fact, okay? This is crazy. They have been able to track genetically every single human being from what they call proto-Adam and proto-Eve. Every single one of us are family members. We all came from the same man and the same woman. And that is not the Bible saying that. That is genetic researchers saying that. Isn't that crazy? Like, all of us can be traced back to a genetic Adam and Eve. And I'm being very specific because they don't say actual Adam and Eve. They call it genetic Adam and Eve or proto-Adam and Eve. But reality is that one man and one woman is responsible for the entire human race that we have in existence today. That's absurd. Like, that's so clear. And again, just to remind you what Darwin said, I'm giving you all this information. If goo to you was impossible, it's because his theory ultimately was really compelling around microevolution, but it did not answer the bigger questions of macro. And just in case you want to see a little bit more, this is from a University of Chicago evolutionary article I read, chronicling the Miller-Urey experiments and subsequent experiments. And they start with the origin on life stands as one of the greatest mysteries of science. Various answers have been proposed, all of which remain unverified. That sounds a whole lot different than evolution is scientific fact and cannot be questioned, doesn't it? For the confidence that gets portrayed to you and to your kids, this word never gets mentioned. And in fact, if you were to present your argument, you would be laughed at or ridiculed or judged or thought simple-minded. And what I would argue is that ultimately evolution and Christianity require faith. Both are faith systems. Because it takes faith to believe that enough time can make the impossible possible. It takes faith to believe that somehow a bunch of lightning bolts created amino acids that somehow linked with some other proteins, that somehow linked with some RNA, some DNA, and some cellular membrane, and then it happened to all be the right combination, that it became self-replicating, and then that self-replicating organism somehow, through slight modifications over time, because that's all you need, eventually became more complex organisms and multicellular organisms, and then became like sea creatures, that then became like land animals, that then became mammals, that then became tree-climbing mammals, that then became you and me. That's a large, really large leap of faith. And I think if we're going to be honest about this good question, we have to look at that. But this is how I want to close it, because ultimately this is what matters. Jesus is asked about divorce in Matthew chapter 19. And I want you to pay attention to his answer. He says, haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female? And so he's making an argument against divorce in the moment, which is a whole separate discussion. But I want you to pay attention to this. Jesus points out that at the beginning, the Creator, so he's showing his worldview. And what does he do? He affirms the historicity. They're not a myth. They're not a theory. Adam and Eve were real people made by a real Creator, Jesus is saying. And the reason this matters is because in Matthew, not 19, but fast forward a few other chapters and what's happened. He is predicting his death. He's crucified. He's placed in a grave, and he comes back 3 days later. And when he comes out of the grave 3 days later, my belief and argument, I think we would all agree with this, is that whatever the dude said before he came out of the grave automatically gets instant credibility. Right? If he said it, I'm with him. Because he did it. He came back from the grave. No one else has ever done that on their own power. This is miraculous. And so whatever he said, I'm co-signing it now. Because if in the bigger thing he was right, then in the lesser things he was right too. And ultimately, if Jesus had confidence in Adam and Eve, we can too. So if you all through today, the scientific arguments, you're like, man, my brain hurts. I don't even know. Then just land the plane here with me. That if a guy can predict his death and resurrection and actually follow through with it, then whatever else he said, I'm with him too. And one of the things he made very clear in Matthew 19 that Paul reaffirms constantly in the New Testament letters is that Adam and Eve were real people made by the Creator, not by a chimpanzee who had a slight modification in his DNA and became a human being. Okay? And again, I'm not being anti-science. I just want to be thoughtful and us actually engage with the assumptions underneath it. The way I came to Christianity is I opened up my assumptions and started asking questions about creation in a way that I hadn't before. And that opened me up to begin to imagine maybe there was a case for a creator. Maybe the Big Bang, maybe evolution doesn't answer all the questions. And ultimately that set me on a path to becoming a Christian. Because Christianity ultimately reached into the deeper parts of my life and started to speak to the deepest needs that I have. The need to be loved, the need to be forgiven, the need for this sense that I was made for more than just this world. That there had to be another world too. That my body, the person inside of me, doesn't age even as my body continues to age. Because I still feel like there's moments where like probably take kickball when the ball is rolling at me and I'm going to run at that thing like I'm a 15-year-old. And my body's like, bop, 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 you're not 15 anymore. But my soul still feels it. Have you ever felt that? You feel young on the inside. But your body just doesn't cooperate. Evolution doesn't have an answer for that. Your desire to be loved and be part of a community, that transcends tribalism. Like, the arguments of evolution are cold, rational, and are terrifying. And the greatest thing that's ever happened, without most people realizing, is that Christianity and the Judeo-Christian worldview is still present enough to protect us from the darkest sides of what evolution argues. Because the theory of evolution is very simple. It's survival of the fittest. It's as an organism, can you reproduce because you're stronger than the other organism? And what happened, and I don't want to get too deep into this, but you play out the early 1900s in the rise of social Darwinism. Okay? Social Darwinism comes from the implications of Darwinism's theories around evolution. And what arises out of social Darwinism? Eugenics. This idea that certain races are more superior to other races. So the racist junk that was already existing around the world gets supercharged by evolution because now they have a scientific argument for why one race is better than the other. And guess who picks up on that argument? Hitler, where a third of the Jewish population is eradicated because he assumes the Aryans are a superior race. Christianity would have never allowed that argument, because Christianity argues that we're all created in the image of God. That means every single one of us have infinite value and worth, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what's been done to you. You may be a $100 bill that's been crumpled up and rubbed in the mud, but you're still a $100 bill. And Christianity makes that argument. The Judeo-Christian world projects that out of the implications of being made in a creator, where evolution simply cannot. And there are whole groups of people on this planet whose lives would be threatened, and they would be deemed inferior if evolution and the naturalistic worldview was ever taken to its logical extremes. I'm telling you, it is absolutely terrifying what that worldview could produce if it was ever unleashed. And that's not me being fear-mongering. That's just me being cold and logical, right? And so ultimately, both of these systems require faith. And my argument simply, as we wrap up this series, as we looked at science, as we looked at Christianity, is that ultimately, Christianity requires less faith than evolution. And that gives us confidence that our basis is not something that we have yet to see in a lab, but is in the fact that there's an empty tomb. And that empty tomb answers all of our deepest longings and our needs. It gives us access to joy, hope, peace, and love. It gives us an ability to forgive others as we've been forgiven. It gives us an ability to break the chains of hate, to rise above, to see each other, every single person on planet Earth, as someone who's been made in the image of God, and to value them with the infinite worth they have. It's the reason why people like you and me have traveled around the world and set up hospitals to take care of people who look nothing like us, who will never contribute to anything, simply because we believed what we believe. And one of the best things that Christians can ever do, my last thought for you, isn't just be really good arguers for why Christianity is right, but to be really good livers of the Christian faith. When people see that we believe what we believe, our beliefs become beautiful and compelling and better. Because our beliefs taken to the logical extremes takes us to such a better place as a people than what the other side does. And that ultimately our confidence is in Jesus, who has been so good to us and so gracious to us, and is ultimately the answer to our good question. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for your grace and your mercy. I pray, Dad, for wisdom, discernment. I know that I dropped a lot of information today, and so I pray that as you help people sift and sort, that what would remain in their hearts and their minds is your goodness, is your grace, and is the confidence that we can have in you because you conquered the grave. And so thank you for all of the scientific fact that we were able to work through. Thank you for all the ways that you created our brains to use logic and rational thought to process all of this stuff. But ultimately, thank you for the gift of faith that allows us to see you and to stand in you and what you've done. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. One of the things I love about Christianity and the origin story in Genesis is the predominant other origin story in the ancient Near East was that the gods created human beings to feed them. That the gods created human beings to satisfy the gods' needs, which is not a very good God, by the way, if you need humans in order to be self-sustaining. But that was the predominant myth floating around in the ancient world, and the competing myth was the Genesis story, which that God didn't create human beings because he needed them. He created them because he wanted them. He created them because out of the perfect relationship within the Trinity, there was so much love overflowing that they could create organisms that could just bask in their love and be in relationship with him. And that the beauty of the Genesis story is that God wanted you. God wanted me
That's why you were created. The world was incomplete without you being here. That may not feel true for you, but it is true about you. And that on top of that, that you were created, even if life hasn't always been good, you were created out of his goodness and his love. That child that you have that really causes you a lot of problems was created by God out of his goodness. Sometimes it's not good, but it is. And the reality is that sometimes I think we just need to be reminded that there is more goodness of God in our life than there is badness of this world around us. And we just wanted to close out this series because ultimately this series was not about science. It was about who was behind the ultimate good question, which is Jesus. And we see the goodness of God through the cross and through the resurrection. And we just wanted to carve out space before we wrap up the series to respond to that. His goodness, his grace, his love over you, over me. So I want to invite you to stand as our team closes us out with this song around the goodness of God.
For the promises you've kept and every need you've met. Lord, I'm so grateful. You were with me every step, and I never will forget. When I think of how you've blessed me, how your hand has never let me go. Never let me go. You have been so good to me. Oh God, I can't believe how you love me. What a friend you have been. So good to me. Oh God, I can't believe how you love me. What a friend you have been. Faithful. Yeah. I call you Savior, for the blood that washed me clean, for the wrongs that you've redeemed. Oh, you're able, and my eyes don't have to see. One more reason to believe, 'cause when I think of how you blessed me, how your hand has never let me go, never let me go. You have been so good to me. Oh God, I can't believe how you love me. What a friend you have been. Lift it up, lift it up. So good to me. Oh God, I can't believe how you love me. What a friend you have been. You've been so good, yeah. Lift your hands all over. Lift your hands. Oh. For every morning, for every open door, I call you faithful, and I just want to thank you, Lord, for every mountain, for every time you brought me through. I call you faithful, and I just want to thank you, Lord, for your forgiveness, for how you never turned away. I call you faithful, and I just want to thank you, Lord, for your salvation. You paid the price I couldn't pay. I call you faithful, and I just want to thank you, Lord. I just want to thank you, Lord. And I just want to thank you, Lord. You have been so good to me. Oh God, I can't believe how you love me. What a friend you have been. So good to me. Oh God, I can't believe how you love me. What a friend you have been. So good to me. Oh God, I can't believe how you love me. What a friend you have been, yeah, yeah. So good to me. Oh God, I can't believe how you love me. What a friend you have been. Oh, oh, oh. I just want to thank you, Lord. I just want to thank you have been so good to me. Oh God, I can't believe how you love me. What a friend you have been. So good to me. Oh God, I can't believe how you love me. What a friend you have been. Oh, oh, what a friend you have been. Oh God, I can't believe, yeah, what a friend you have been. So good.
That is, this has not been a series about science. This has been a series about the God of not just science, but the God of salvation, who stepped into this world, who pursued you, pursued me, and made a way where there was no way. I mean, one of the things about evolution that we rarely ever think about, but one of the common questions I get with people when they ask about faith is, why is the world so hard? Why is life so difficult? Why is there so much bad? And evolution has no answer to that outside of, well, that's just the way it is. It's survival of the fittest. And the fact that people ask that question, I think, is a reflection of the deeper longing that we know we were created to live in a world that was perfect, and the tension of living in one that's not. And ultimately, the hope of Jesus Christ is that he came to fix the brokenness inside of us, the sin and death that raged internally and that spilled out into the outer world that continues to kind of be broken because of our brokenness. And that evolution can't even answer the hope of salvation, but Christianity can. And if you were here today, and as I've been processing, maybe you joined us online, I meant what I said. I would love to have a conversation with you about it, because you're dealing with one of the deepest questions about life. And as a church, we want to make space for you to process the most significant questions about life and hope and salvation and what does all this stuff even mean. And so if you're curious, I gave you my email address, but you can simply go to encounterchurch.com/faith. There's a way to get in touch with me there. There's resources there. You can request a book that we'll send to you to help you process more stuff if you're not ready for a conversation, because we think this matters. We think Jesus Christ is alive, and that headline changes everything. And we want to be a part of introducing that headline to your life. So thank you for being here today. Like Dallas said, right after Barnes Memorial Park, just right up Highway 1, right beside Staples and Dedham. To the left, right down the road from there, is a field. We'll be gathered around that field, I think 40, 50 of us. Bring a picnic, grab some food on the way. We're going to hang out, probably hurt ourselves for some of us. But it's going to be fun. And it'll just be a way to hang out, get to know people inside the church. There's a playground there for your kids as well. And so, and if all this nerdiness stuff has gotten old for you, good news. Next week, we're done. We start a brand new series on Elijah that we're excited about, where we're just going to be looking at Elijah, this Old Testament prophet. Because every August, we like to study one person of the Bible so that our Bible knowledge grows and our awareness of who the people in Scripture are. So really excited. Dallas will be kicking that off next week, and there will be no science involved, all right? So we look forward to seeing you back next week or even just in a few minutes down the road. God bless you. Thanks for being here at Encounter Church today.